Thank you for viewing this presentation. This is Richard Klein. I'm President of Community and Environmental Defense Services. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll learn how to ensure that construction sites active in your watershed are complying with the most important erosion and sediment pollution control requirements. Though geared to the Chesapeake Bay watershed, much of the following advice is applicable nationwide. The publication on the left is the ES = P guidance document. It reiterates everything we'll present in the next 30 minutes. It's something you can refer to at a construction site if you need help completing the questions posed in the ES = P checklist on the right. The publication can be downloaded from the guidance document section of the CEDS Watershed Audit webpage at ceds.org/audit. The form can be completed online at ceds.org/ESP-report. You have three options for reducing construction site pollution. First, you can help us expand the Watershed Advocates Construction ESP database by simply completing the form on the left online. Second, you can report what you find to an enforcement agency. Third, you can contact the developer directly with a letter like that. Here we have an example of what your efforts could accomplish. These photos are of a construction site typical of the 4,000 or so sites that may be active right now throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The site was mostly bare soil, fully exposed to erosive forces. While the site did drain to sediment trapping measures, these only keep a third to half the eroded soil on site. The rest would flow into Chesapeake Bay tributary streams. Applying a thick layer of mulch along with grass seed would reduce sediment pollution by 90 to 99%. The local watershed group sent the upper left letter to the developer on December the 8th. By 9 days later, the developer had responded by covering all the exposed soil with straw mulch. This is but one of many. Nothing illustrates the impact of construction sediment better than this 1960s photo of Severn Run taken just upstream of the site, which is outside of Annapolis, Maryland. Every spring, countless yellow perch would spawn in Severn Run. The fish were so plentiful that the stream surface was continuously scaly backs from bank to bank. You would see long streamers of yellow perch eggs hanging from every aquatic plant, stick, or other submerged object. Today, yellow perch still enter Severn Run, but few of their eggs hatch or survive to adulthood. A storm occurred one spring in the late 1960s while a new bridge was being built over Severn Run. So much mud washed into Severn Run that an estimated 100 million yellow perch eggs were killed. Just one relatively small construction site and a single storm did all this damage. The reason why sediment was so deadly is the sticky coating on the surface of yellow perch eggs. This sticky coating allows the eggs to attach to objects, which prevents them from floating downstream. But sediment suspended in water also sticks to egg surfaces. In the case of the Severn Run disaster, egg surfaces were completely coated with sediment. The developing embryos then suffocated. And the damage is not confined to fisheries. Sediment blocks sunlight from penetrating the water column and is a major reason for the decline of submerged aquatic plants. Of course, these plants are vital to ecosystems like that found in rivers, lakes, and the Chesapeake. Sediment deposited along river channels can rob flood storage capacity and cause formerly safe roads or homes to be inundated come major storms. Sediment also adds to water treatment costs and makes it more difficult to treat water to a level suited for human consumption. And of course, sediment fills in boating channels, marshes, and other aquatic habitats. We estimate that for every dollar spent keeping sediment out of waterways, we all save $100 in damages avoided. The Chesapeake watershed is shown in the upper left. This 64,000 square mile area includes 6 states and Washington, D.C. All 7 jurisdictions have adopted the Erosion-Sediment Control manuals you see here. All but the smallest construction site must have an approved erosion-sediment control plan before any groundbreaking can occur. To gain approval, the plan must conform to the appropriate manual. Fortunately, the manuals call for much of the same control measures, and all place great emphasis on getting exposed soil under a protective cover of straw, mulch, and grass as quickly as possible. The reason for this emphasis on mulching, seeding, is that exposed soil equals pollution. Based on a vast amount of scientific literature, the only way to protect aquatic ecosystems is to ensure that disturbed soils are protected or stabilized from erosive forces. Stabilization reduces off-site sediment pollution by 90 to 99%. Perimeter controls like the failing black silt fence you see here can retain a third to half the sediment on site. So if you see exposed soil on a construction site, pollution of nearby waters will likely occur come the next major storm. So here's how erosion sediment control is supposed to work. You begin with an undisturbed site like that on the left. The only clearing done is a narrow swath along the downhill edge of the site, which is indicated in the right photo by the earth-colored line. The red arrows show the direction of runoff flow, downhill of course. Within this narrow swath, perimeter control measures are installed like the swale and silt fence in the upper right photo. The purpose of the swale and silt fence is to carry sediment-laden runoff to a trapping device, which is also installed within that perimeter swath. The 2 blue areas are sediment traps like that in the middle photo. All of the perimeter controls are then stabilized with a dense layer of straw mulch and seeded with grass. Once the perimeter controls are in place and stabilized, then the contractor can clear the remainder of the site. Here we see a sediment trap. Note the muddy water in the trap. This is caused by clay particles which take a long time to settle. As a result, most don't settle, so you see muddy water flowing from a trap that is working just fine. But if the area draining to the trap is well stabilized with a thick layer of mulch or a dense growth of grass, then you shouldn't see much in the way of muddy water leaving the site. In other words, muddy water may signal exposed soil somewhere on the site. Once perimeter controls have been installed and stabilized, all plans will call for quickly bringing the interior of the site up to the point where building may begin. This point is known as rough grade. Here we see a hillside in the upper right before grading. Through cutting, filling, and grading, the hillside is leveled out and brought to the elevations where road, parking lot, and building construction can begin, along with utility installation. Once rough grade is reached, you'll see building foundations appear along the road, along with road or parking lot beds. The 6 Chesapeake Bay watershed states and D.C. varied how much time is allowed to complete and stabilize perimeter controls. The range is from 3 to 30 days. Again, once the perimeter is stabilized, interior clearing may begin and the site brought up to rough grade. Time limits for the second phase range from 7 to 30 days. You'll find these limits for your state in the ES=P guidance document. It's our hope that with your help we can establish a widespread public perception that exposed soil equals pollution. In other words, we hope that when people see exposed soil on a construction site, they'll think pollution. We hope that eventually exposed construction site soil will evoke the same reaction as junked cars on lawns or littering. Once ES=P becomes a widely held perception, voluntary compliance with construction site stabilization requirements may become as common as voluntary participation with curbside recyclables collection or keeping lawns mowed. Please consider running an article in your newsletter or posting one on your website or Facebook page. The article in the upper left can provide background and can even be run verbatim. It's not copyrighted. Also, consider sending out a postcard to your members like that shown in the lower right. The goal is to educate all residents of your watershed that exposed soil on a construction site must be quickly eliminated. Okay, now as to the specifics of what we'd like you to look for on construction sites. Again, this will not require trespassing onto the site, so there's no need for hard hats or bail money. You should be able to see everything you need from public areas adjoining each construction site. These areas include streets, adjacent parking lots, stores, shopping centers, and other places that are open to the public. In the commercial site pictured here, the adjoining roads and commercial areas allow you to view the site from three sides. Rural sites are usually a bit more challenging, but even here, two adjoining roads allow a viewing of most of the site. In many rural residential projects, the streets are completed quickly, then open to prospective home buyers. If you can't see all of a site from one point, then search for public areas on other sides of a site. Now we're going to walk you through the information requested on the Exposed Soil Equals Pollution checklist. At many construction sites, entrances, there will be a sign like that pictured here. Most of the construction site information requested on the checklist can be obtained from this sign. Hopefully you'll use this information to send a thank you letter to the developer for doing such a great job of stabilizing exposed soil. If the sign gives a phone number or web address, then note this next to company contact info. When you first encounter a site, you'll seldom learn the street address, so describe the site location using landmarks. Attempt to estimate the size of the site. For small sites, this is relatively easy. Larger sites can be more challenging. With a suburban site like this one, you can usually use your car odometer to measure length and width by driving along adjoining roads. It also helps to estimate how many units of a known distance can fit within a site. The old standby is a football field. Frequently, you can make out the site boundaries on aerial photos even when they predate site clearance. You can then measure site area from the photo. Now we're ready for the most important task. As you look at a site from each vantage point, estimate how much is exposed soil. In other words, of the area that was originally disturbed, what percentage is soil lacking any vegetation, mulch, or other measures stabilizing erosive forces? Here, our commercial site is bounded by a solid red line. The line marks the original limits of disturbance. I've used green to outline the areas which appear stable to me. Most of the stabilization is vegetation, but I also included areas which appear to be stone or asphalt driveways. I estimate that 70% of this site is exposed soil, the rest is stabilized. However, the vegetation appears thin at points within each of the areas outlined with green. It's hard to tell from this aerial photo just how much of the stabilization is thin. This is better determined on the ground. Here we have 5 aerial photos of the same residential site. The top photos were taken before the site was cleared. The middle and lower right show the site after it was cleared and construction had started. The dashed red line runs along the limits of disturbance. In the lower left is an enlargement of a photo of the same site. I'd say that of the disturbed areas shown in this portion of the site, 50 to 60% is exposed soil. Do you agree with those figures? Earlier I said it's easier to estimate exposed soil on the ground in contrast to an aerial view. It's also easier to assess stabilization while standing beside the site. For larger sites, you may need binoculars. Let's say that all you can see in the upper October photo is part of the disturbed area, back to the tree line. From what can be seen here, I'd estimate that 70% of the site is exposed soil. In the December photo, all exposed soil has been stabilized. The gray-green you see in this bottom photo is mulch applied to this site in response to the developer letter. Again, on large sites you can seldom see all from one vantage point, so please take the time to try and find other public viewing areas. To stabilize exposed soil from the erosive forces of water and wind, measures must be applied in ways that fully protect soils from these forces. For areas outside of roadbeds, parking lots, and building foundations, stabilization takes the form of mulch and seeding. When the ground is frozen, it may be prudent to apply just mulch, but seed must be applied as soon as the ground falls. The reason for seed is that mulch is temporary, and a dense growth of grass is far more effective in preventing erosion. Stabilization is usually achieved by applying a temporary layer of straw mulch, then establishing grass on areas not slated for disturbance in the near future. The mulch must be thick enough to obscure underlying soils, then reapplied as straw degrades. A vegetative cover, usually grass, must be established in areas that won't be disturbed for a while. The vegetation should then achieve a 95% cover within 4 to 8 weeks during the growing season, which is March to October. Here you see examples of inadequate mulch and vegetative cover. You can see the soil at numerous points. This degree of stabilization is far short of that required to minimize erosion and to protect aquatic resources. Partial stabilization as poor as this would necessitate additional treatments. Road and parking lot beds should be stabilized with a layer of stone. Most sites can be brought up to rough grade within 2 weeks. Once rough grade is reached, contractors will usually begin road and parking lot construction. Both the road and parking lot beds should be quickly protected with a layer of stone. The stone layer must be thick enough to obscure underlying soils from view. In many residential projects, the streets are usually completed with asphalt shortly after construction activity begins. Now that we're nearing the end of this presentation, let's summarize. Initial clearance should be limited to a narrow swath along the downslope perimeter. Perimeter controls like silt fence, earth berms, and sediment traps should be quickly installed, then stabilized. During the growing season, March to October, grass should achieve a dense cover within 4 to 8 weeks, otherwise another seeding is needed. Once perimeter control is completed and stabilized, the rest of the site can be cleared and brought to rough grade. Once any part of the site reaches the point where construction can begin, all adjoining soil should be stabilized. In other words, once foundations appear, like that on the left, all adjoining areas of exposed soil should be stabilized. Be aware that some unscrupulous contractors may engage in the bulldozer bluff. They keep a piece of equipment on site and run it around occasionally to claim grading is still occurring. On the right, you see tips for when to call this bluff. Has the equipment been idle for 7 days or more? If yes, then the entire area must be stabilized immediately. And as you can see, the orange excavator in the background, the red arrows are pointing to it. Between October 15th and November 24th, it hadn't moved at all. So, again, this entire area must be stabilized. If you find problems on a construction site, you can either report it to an enforcement agency or contact the developer directly. Instructions for finding enforcement agencies in your part of the Chesapeake watershed will be found on pages 7 and 8 of the ESP guidance document. On the left, you see pointers for making an initial report or referral to an enforcement agency. On the right is an example of what you could say during a report by phone or email. But if enforcement resources are spread thin in your area, then corrective action may take quite some time. If you think it could be a while before an inspector responds to your referral, then consider sending a letter or email like this one on the right. This is similar to the letter the Severn River Association sent to the developer, That letter resulted in a quick and dramatic improvement. We're confident most of your letters will produce similar results. If you find sites with very good stabilization, then please consider sending a thank you letter like this one. So what happens when the developer doesn't cooperate or an enforcement agency fails to act? Your first step should be to contact the official who represents you on the legislative body that oversees the enforcement agency. This will be a city council, county commissioners, aldermen, etc. If you can show you tried to work cooperatively and got nowhere, then it's likely the official will make some calls. If this doesn't work, then try the next steps shown here on the right. When all else fails, there's always litigation, but this must be an option of last resort. And you should first exhaust each of the steps shown here. Most of the time, an issue will be resolved by the time you reach the threat of litigation. Sometimes, though, there's a need to establish a legal precedent. In this case, you may want to get to court as quickly as possible. Here's a flow chart showing the steps you may wish to consider with each of the different responses you're likely to get from the developer or an enforcement agency. If your local sediment control inspection program has been started for staff and other resources, then don't be surprised if you find lots of problems, like the pond full of sediment above. And don't blame the inspectors. Instead, mount a public campaign to provide the agency with the resources they need to do their job. In the lower photo, you see that same pond after it was cleaned of sediment. This was a result of citizens working with the developer and enforcement agency. Far too many newcomers make the mistake that they need to have a friendly relationship with decision makers. While such a relationship can be desirable, it's far more important that these officials respect you. In other words, when weeks or months go by without improvements, then it's time to start mobilizing voters to support your call for change. Please let us know what you find and how corrective action progresses by completing this brief report posted at ceds.org/ESP report. Please complete a separate report every time that you visit a site. With enough reports in the database, we could develop a tool that we can use to identify localities that are doing particularly well. By learning why their program is working, we can help others do the same. Similarly, it can allow the environmental community to identify jurisdictions not doing so well who are in need of greater public support. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Our contact information is here on the slide. And if you have concerns about anything else that might affect a neighborhood or the environment anywhere in the U.S., please contact us as well. We help people all throughout the U.S. with a wide variety of issues that may pose a threat to a neighborhood or the environment. So we're always at your disposal. Thank you again.